So, Torsten, you are the corporate counsel of EAME. Can you tell us a little bit about your input, the reason you are at the Georgetown Corporate Counsel event?
Sure. I very much enjoy coming here. This is the second time I attend one of these events from Georgetown. I think it's a very unique opportunity to meet people in practice, other corporate counsels, to meet people from academia, people from law firms, and to talk about very specific, important topics that are relevant for what we do as lawyers, both working for companies and working in academia, studying developments in legal theory and practice. So I very much enjoy the opportunity to come here and meet with this diverse group of people.
Great. I learned from your presentation that you have a great comparison between the Foreign Corruption Practice Act, the way the US confronts corruption, and the UK Bribery Act, the UK Bribery.
Well, I mean, the example that I used a little bit is the following. I am a German attorney. I'm licensed in the US as well. I have observed the legal development on both sides of the ocean for a while, and I practice, so to speak, in between. And when we look at certain very prominent areas of law, like the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, it's sometimes helpful to see it a little in the cultural context. And for an American, it's often very difficult, for instance, to understand the European data privacy rules, because Europe is very protective of data privacy. It's a completely different concept. And sometimes on a similar token, Europeans are struggling with some of the US laws, which apply all over the world, like Export Control and Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And so there's this element of, cultural understanding that's needed, and sometimes it's been referred to as, almost a little bit of a torture instrument that one side of the Atlantic is using to, so to speak, export values to the other side. Obviously, in the Foreign Corrupt Practices context, it's a broader scope. There's the OECD, there's a whole international development that has taken place in the last 15 years, which has changed the landscape on how to fight corruption.
Definitely. I learned from your presentation also that you talk about the Siemens case as a landmark case. In your personal capacity and your experience, and as a German attorney, could you elaborate?
Yes, I'd be happy to. It's interesting to look at the developments in foreign corruption. I mean, first of all, just to go one more back on the cultural side, it's important to understand that culture and compliance with law is not something that the whole world shares as the same value. And I was giving the example of you being in a car with your best friend. Your best friend had a couple of beers too many. There's a little accident. The best friend runs into a tree on the side of the road. The police is going to come in 5 minutes. No person is injured, and the best friend turns to you and says, "Would you take over the wheel? I really don't want to get any points, and you have no alcohol. So would you do that?" And when you ask the question, who would actually do that, you find, like in the audience right now, it's half-half. Half of the people said, "Of course, this is my best friend. I will help him." Whereas the other half would say, "No, that's against the law. I can't, switch side because I'm pretending to be the driver, which I wasn't." Now, the most interesting cultural point is the later question about trust. Both people from certain parts of the world, when they hear your answer of not being able to switch, especially from southern parts or Asian parts, would say, "How can I trust a person who would not switch seats for the best friend in a situation like that?" Because trust is associated with social connections which bond above everything else. Whereas from the North American context, the answer is exactly the opposite. A person who would switch seats would say, "How can I trust a person who switches seats because they're not obeying the law?" So that gives you just an indication of the difficulty of a cross-cultural understanding and a rules-based system. Now, having said that, we need to acknowledge that all of the evidence shows that in order to develop as economies, it is important and good to eliminate corruption, because corruption, whereas the same kind of small payment issues that have happened for 200 years ago in Germany are no longer tolerated, and they are in the way of an efficient working of the companies and of the business. And so corruption is expensive, and it's not good for businesses and for the economy as a whole. Now, for Siemens, just to close it up on that, if you look at what happened to Siemens, it's probably the most prominent anti-corruption case in history. And as a German, I observed that with a lot of interest, because if you look at the board structure, the board of Siemens is completely changed as a consequence. In 2006, when that started, you had a certain number of people in the leadership of the company. 2 years later, all of the senior leadership team is essentially gone. And you've had a company that had to pay over 1.5 billion in fines across the board, and that have reached settlements with enforcement authorities all over the landscape. And you have a company that today is in many regards viewed as the landmark of anti-corruption fighting. And the most interesting part is, if you ask the senior executives like Peter Löscher, he's been quoted as saying, yes, it cost a lot of money to do this. Yes, it was very painful, but they thought they came out as a better company, and they're more successful now after that painful transformation than they have been before. So
and actually 2009 was their best year.
Was the best year, and they said they're happy with what has happened. So it's one of the examples where they've turned it positive into a positive opportunity.
Great. Thank you so much.